Okay, our next talk is one about compute resources. So we wanted to just give some brief idea of some of the plans that we have in terms of where the computing power behind Brown Dog will come from. We are relatively early in these conversations, so we're giving you some ideas. The architecture and all of that hasn't been totally finalized yet. So what I want to do is introduce Rob Cooper, Jay Alameda, and also Vlad Kindratinko from NCSA. And they're going to just talk a little bit about the different possibilities and how we're thinking about elasticity and scalability and things. Yeah. I guess I need to get this back. Okay, that should do it. Okay.
Thank you. So my name is Rob Cooper. I work for the Brown Dog team at ISDA. I happen also to be the domain champion for data analytics for Exceed. Jay Alameda, standing there, will talk about Exceed, and Vlad will talk about some of the work done at NCSA that we plan on leveraging. People have seen the examples that we've done for DAP and DTS, and clearly from there you can already see Kenton says, please don't hit it too much because we're not quite ready yet for it. It needs to scale. We're going to have to scale. So the question is, how does the data access proxy that we have scale? How does the data tilling service that we have scale? What options do we have to scale? We've looked at all these things, and what I'm trying to present today is a little bit how we're planning on doing that. So if you think about it, the computer has finite resources. It needs CPUs, memory, disk, and network. That's pretty much what we need for the three pieces or the two pieces that we have, the data access proxy and the data tilling services. And so if we look at those four pieces, there's different ways that we can scale them. Well, first, let's talk about what is scalability. Scalability is a system whose performance improves after adding hardware proportionally to the capacity added. So if I add something to it, it should scale, it should be bigger, it should be faster, it should be better. So how can we do that? Well, there's two ways of doing this. There's scaling up. I take a computer, I put an extra CPU, I put extra memory, I put extra disk, I put an extra network in there. Boom, I get twice the speed and twice the performance. And I keep doing this, and eventually I run out of CPU sockets, so I go buy a bigger machine. But no matter what I do, I will hit a limit. Every time I do this, there's a physical limit, and eventually I have the biggest, the best machine available, and it's still not scalable. So the other way of doing it is scaling out, where basically it means I have a computer, it works great. I buy a second computer, I put it next to it, I configure my software, and all of a sudden I have twice the performance. And this is perfectly scalable. I put a third, fourth, fifth, sixth. If people went to Blue Waters yesterday, they saw the big racks sitting there. I basically put 100, 200 of these machines there, and all of a sudden I have 200 types of capabilities of what I had before. So that is really where we want to go. We can't just scale by buying a bigger processor or buy more memory. We really have to scale in the scaling out this horizontally way. So how can we do that? Well, there's this notion called elasticity. This is basically, as demand requires it, we grow. So if a lot of people say, I'm starting uploading images and I need to extract little cells or little features from it, we need to make sure that we can grow in that direction. On the other hand, if people start uploading lots of books, we need to grow in that direction. We need to start doing text mining on those books. So depending on what we need to be able to grow. But right, I can go and buy a machine, put it in there, put all this in there, and 3 days from today, nobody's using that particular extractor anymore, and that beautiful machine is sitting in the machine room using lots of energy. And so it'd be nice if I can turn it off or flip a switch and say, okay, you're now responsible for a different task. So that's where we want to go to. Now, to do this, we need to keep small requirements so that we can put them everywhere, small virtual machines. And like I said, if people use them, great, bring them up. If people don't use them anymore, just shut them down and use that CPU for something else. So, looking at the data access proxy. The architecture that we have is we have a front end, which is polyglot, which basically does the conversion. But in the back end, we have many different virtual machines. Kenton hinted at that already, where he says some of it is running Windows XP. Some of it is running on Linux. Some of it might even be running on DOS if we need to do the conversions on a DOS machine. The networking might be slightly harder, but we try to basically have as many different architectures as possible that we use. So if you look at it, we have a software server that does ImageMagick and is really good at it. We have a software server that does OpenOffice, one that does FFmpeg. And if we need an extra video conversion, we just start up an extra software server that does FFmpeg, and all of a sudden we're up and running and we have twice the capacity that we had before. So this is where we want to go with Polyglot. And you can clearly see that this is easy to grow out. If Polyglot, the top piece, becomes too busy, we put a load balancing on top of it and we spread the load out over different versions of Polyglot. Medici, thanks to Luigi, I have a beautiful slide of that, we have started thinking about that from the beginning. How can we really grow this? So Luigi has the load balancer in there with the many different Medici front ends. We have Elasticsearch that allows us to do the searching across everything. We have MongoDB, which allows us to grow horizontally because we can have multiple of these databases hooked together. We have a message bus that we use in the backend to actually share the data and share the extraction job so that basically if we need to, we can start up an extra extractor that extracts the information for you. So again, this is basically set up to grow horizontally. Most of these systems are not, well, they can grow vertically as well, of course, but they're really set up to grow horizontally, and that's where we want to go. So how can we grow? Well, first step, we can add more servers to Aista. We have some funding for in Brown Dog for this, and we can do it, but it's not sustainable, right? We have a certain limited amount of money, and personally, I think it's better spent on people money so that we can help you better with your research problem than adding more servers to our capacity. There's commercial clouds, Amazon. I'll talk a little bit about that. Then Jay will talk a little bit about the Exceed resources, and Vlad will talk about the NCSA cloud infrastructure that we have. So Amazon is well known for its cloud computing. A lot of startups these days will use Amazon to start up their startups. You can go there, you can say what you want, what services you want. They have web service front ends, they have load balancers. They are set up perfectly for our use case. They can grow on demand as we need to. They can shut down on demand. And so this is probably one of the things that we look at, and this is where we have some funding for. Batch processing, if we have batch jobs that we want to do like an extractor, we can again use the Amazon cloud system. Pricing wise, if you look at it, it looks really cheap. It's about 2.6 cents per hour on a reasonable compute node. But if you think about it, I can spend $10,000, buy myself a server sitting in the corner somewhere with about 20 VMs. If I do the math, it's about $500 per VM. And that, if I look at that, it's about 2 hours of continuous runtime. But what I said is we don't want to run things continuously. We want to scale horizontally. So if I then start looking and say, you know what, if I only run it for 8 hours per day, I already have a cheaper machine running it at Amazon than if I have it here. On top of that, if I would have the same system running here and it goes down, we're toast, right? All of a sudden, my 20 VMs are gone, and we lost a big chunk of our infrastructure. And Amazon, the nice thing is, it's not my problem, it's their problem, right? I can say, I ordered a VM, why is it not up and running? Now, there are some small details that people might seen in the past where half of Amazon was down or not accessible, but those are, again, not my problem, somebody else. They have a bunch of engineers sitting there that will take care of that for us. So I think that's where we go, but we have other wonderful resources, amongst others. Jay will talk about them.
All right, I'll go over a few things that are available from Exceed that might help meet the need for Brown Dog. First of all, we'll start off with what is Exceed, and I'll use a very simple description of what it is. It's a service, a project actually that integrates high-performance computing resources and visualization and data analysis resources. Some of the services we provide frontline support, uniform documentation amongst all these resources, extended collaborative support, which is the part of the organization I'm part of, training, education, and outreach services and allocations and more. And then there's the URL. You can go and dig around our website and learn about these different services that we offer. We support a wide variety of HPC and RDAV resources. We have a list at that URL, which has, and I'll give you a view into this list. It gives you an overview and expiration dates. Most importantly, these are all independently funded projects that we're integrating for each resource. There's a variety of things. There's traditional clusters. I already mentioned the visualization and data analysis resources, storage resources, which are really associated with compute allocations, high throughput resources, test beds and services. And when we get to the bottom is where things get more interesting for Brown Dog. Looking at the traditional, looking at that particular resource page, you see some of the traditional resources, the compute resources. There's Stampede, which is our largest resource. It's approximately a 2 petaflop cluster plus an augmentation with Xeon fees. There's a number of other resources. If you notice, the expiration dates vary all over the place from 2017, 2014, 2015 for these resources. They're all independently funded. And actually, SuperMike is an NSF MRI award that's going to come on as part of their, that resource is going to be available to Exceed researchers. There's also some visualization resources, one at TAC and one at NICS. And the storage resources, as I mentioned, are really meant to be used with a particular storage or a particular compute allocation at a site. They're not allocated independently, unfortunately. And then when we get to the test beds and services, I'm going to go into a little more detail on Future Grid, and which has a very close expiration date, and then Quarry, which conveniently does not have an expiration date, either by whichever mechanism, either we don't know it or they didn't tell us. So the Future Grid was probably the most interesting resource for Brown Dog. It has a number of partitions. So it has a HPC partition. It has infrastructure as a service provided with a number of different solutions, Nimbus, OpenStack, and Eucalyptus, and then some dedicated partitions for different projects. On top of the infrastructure as a service, they layer platforms as a service, so MapReduce, Hadoop, and so on top of those particular partitions. Another interesting resource is Quarry, which is it's billed as a web service hosting environment. If you put in for an allocation in Exceed and say you have a web service component for a persistent web service, you can ask for Quarry resources. And it either uses NSF home directories or Lustre-based storage, which unfortunately you have to ask for independently. That's allocated through Indiana University, that Lustre-based storage. But if you need a lot of storage, this is a good way to get that. And then they have a particular way of hosting Linux distributions, and I'm not actually familiar with OpenVZ. I don't know if you guys are. And the important building of this is it provides an ability to have a persistent virtual machine. So this has been around for a while, and people are using this quite extensively. More interesting, and if you're interested in more details, you can go. We had a conference last week in Atlanta called Exceed 14. The San Diego team did a very nice talk on this new resource, Comet, that's going to be hosted at San Diego Supercomputing Center. SDSC has experience with a couple of different important systems. One is called Gordon, which has its important characteristics are flash memory for providing low latency access to storage, as well as persistent storage nodes, which are allocable for projects, and a lot of projects have taken advantage of those. There's also SDSC Trestles, which is aimed at supporting smaller jobs and gateway jobs, so really for the long tail of science. The statistic they pointed out was that 99% of the jobs used in 2012 used less than 2048 cores, so they're really aiming at that particular size of jobs, a smaller set of size of jobs. And out of that, those consume about half the time available in across the NSF resources that Exceed supports. Comet was designed to pick up Future Grid, so they pulled in Indiana University as a partner to try to pick up some of the functionality that Future Grid provided. Most importantly, virtual clusters. The other thing they provide is gateway hosting nodes, actually picking up off of what Trestles provided, and a virtual machine repository. The size of jobs for trestles, it's a fairly large machine. It's actually going to be, for Comet, it's going to be almost as large as Stampede, but it's really only designed to scale jobs within a rack. And so between racks, there's less bandwidth. So really, you want to run your jobs within a rack. It also is going to have flash memory, picking up on what Gordon provided, and it's going to be aiming at providing a lot of capacity for 99% of Exceed jobs that are supported. It gets a little more interesting with virtualization on this machine. You can schedule virtual machine jobs like batch jobs. It'll provide the ability for you to host your virtual machines in a repository so that when the batch job fires up, it'll pull out the virtual machine and then fire it up onto the hardware. But what's really cool is the ability to have a virtual HPC cluster layered on top of high performance InfiniBand. So whatever software stack you need to run your application, and if you need chunks of whole nodes, more than one whole node, you can grab with your own software stack your own cluster. So that's Comet. I want to put out a question for this group, because I think when coming from my Exceed side, I like to think of what are the relationships Exceed should have with other projects, whether they're SI² projects or DIBS projects. And I think a premise that Kenton and everybody in this group are thinking, that you really like to see Brown Dog become a really important part of a researcher's workflow, that the services, DAP and DTS, are going to become integral. And so I'd like to ask if there should be a place where we think about Brown Dog becoming an Exceed service provider, in the sense that providing a digital service that could be really vitally important for researchers. So I'll just throw that out there, and now it's Vlad's turn.
All right, so hello, my name is Vlad Kindratenko. I am a research scientist at NCSA working in the group called Innovative Systems Lab. So Innovative Systems Lab is essentially NCSA's research and development arm. This is an organization within NCSA that is designated to look at new technologies and how these technologies can support primary or core businesses of NCSA in the future. So we evaluate upcoming technologies. We also develop new technologies that might feed into different projects. And so we historically look at processor technologies in the past, but now we are also looking at storage and interconnect technologies as well, because those are becoming more and more critical resources in many cases. We typically tend to look at relatively short-term projects which with a span of 1 to 5 years, and how these new technologies can benefit those projects and so on. And our focus is on new systems or impact on existing upcoming systems for NCSA. So I will briefly go over the resources that ISL has. Unlike Exceed, ISL doesn't provide any persistent computing infrastructure or any persistent or production services. Instead, we provide access to some of the cutting-edge technologies with the goal to enable you to evaluate those for the suitability for your projects. So instead of you going and buying some of the computers just to figure out if this is a good match for your project or not, we probably already have some of those computers available, or some of those technologies. And so you can come to us and you can try to run your applications on those computing resources and try to figure out if this is what you need. And so computer systems, we sort of use a loose word here. This also includes computer architectures and also software systems that go on top of them. So you might be interested, for example, in understanding how different virtualization technologies can be used for different purposes in your project. And so we might be able to set up an environment in which you will have access to different virtualization technologies and so on. So we run several of the systems, and so even though Kenton told me not to talk about Hadoop because he thinks it's not that important, this is actually an example of a project that somebody from NCSA came and said, you know, we are desperately trying to find a deployment of Hadoop on which we can run experiments. And so we had resources available that we put together into a Hadoop cluster, and now this cluster is used by GIS group at NCSA. They are trying to figure out if this is a technology and what components are needed for this technology to support their work. And so this is just an example of a project that if somebody here has a particular need to put together a relatively unique resource that is not available or easily available somewhere else, we might be able to do that. Our sort of biggest and most complex resource at the moment is OpenStack Cloud. Unfortunately, this cloud has been going some additional development over the summer, and hopefully by the end of this month it will become available online again. But this is an OpenStack cloud running Havana distribution, so this is a previous generation distribution for OpenStack Cloud, but it was deployed in the beginning of this year. And this cloud environment is such that the user can go and fire up a virtual machine, and so we have a collection of VMs that can be launched, or user can build his own, and can run some set of those virtual machines and try to run his applications on top of those virtual machines. Now, again, this is not to be used as a production resource, but this is something that can be used for just understanding how a cloud infrastructure might work for in your application environment, and also for building, prototyping, and experimenting with virtual machines and with different components going into this and so on. And so this resource is available. We basically give access to almost anybody who has a legitimate need for trying to play with cloud computing. We just recently purchased another stack of computers, another rack of computers, which is going to be essentially a replacement for this OpenStack cloud. Here we will have, we have a more modern hardware, and we will be experimenting with more advanced components, in particular with software-defined networks, so with the ability to lay on top of the physical network infrastructure, to lay virtual networking infrastructures such that very complex, very involved networking configurations can be tested and evaluated, and then their impact understood and quantified for different applications. So the system is relatively small, but it's sufficient to run several dozens of virtual machines. It has something of the order of 70 terabytes of storage attached to it. It has one high memory node, which I will talk a bit later as a separate item, because that node has some implications for other applications as well. And it also has a very extensive network interconnect. So there are several switches. There are two 10 gig switches, and there are something like 4 additional 1 gig switches for management and for data and so on. So there is a lot of possibilities here to experiment with networking technologies. And so I think the overall idea of this particular system is to enable you to virtually create the infrastructure of the system that you want to build. And then go and take that blueprint of the infrastructure you created and possibly go and replicate it as a separate physical system, or redeploy it on some other computing resource, some other cloud-like resource. So one of the nodes in this configuration is our high memory node. And this node actually has 3 terabytes of RAM. And so that's something that is quite substantial amount of RAM in terms of conventional computing resources in a single node. So it has 4 CPU sockets, 48 CPU cores altogether. This CPU cores are dual threaded, so there are 96 threads that can be run simultaneously. And there is a very large memory system that comes with this 3 terabytes of RAM. There is also 3 terabytes worth of SSDs. These are very fast 12 gigabits per second SSDs. So you actually have a system with very large memory and with very fast SSD file system that you can match with that memory. And so for applications in which you want to maintain very large data set in memory, this system actually is a good example of hardware that can do that. The main user of the system at the moment actually the bioinformatics tools. They tend to have data sets in the range of hundreds of gigabytes, and so just maintaining the entire data set in memory and not copying it multiple times, not moving it multiple times from disk to memory and back is really helpful for this sort of applications. So if you have a project in which you would like to evaluate the impact of memory hierarchy on your applications, to evaluate the impact of having the entire data set in memory or in memory-based file system, because some of this memory also can be used to set up a file system. And so you can maintain everything in that file system. Then you're welcome to get in touch with us. We would be very much interested in seeing how different how different projects can actually use a technology like that. So we also have some other resources which are sort of minor compared to everything else. But again, for people who are interested in evaluating or having access to these resources, they are available. So we have an HPC cluster, conventional HPC cluster with 8 compute nodes. We have Intel Xeon Phi server with 2 Xeon Phi cards. These are accelerators from Intel. These are competitors to NVIDIA GPUs. And of course, we have an NVIDIA GPU system with 8 GPUs. So typically, conventional GPU-based computing resource has 1 or 2 GPUs in it. The one chassis that we have contains 8 of them, and so this is really beneficial for applications that can take advantage of multiple GPUs available in this single chassis. There aren't that many applications like that, and so that's why there aren't that many systems that have multiple GPUs in that. But if you have an application that fits into that range, we have a system in which you can try. So that's pretty much it for my presentation, and so you're welcome to get in touch with ISL at NCSA to talk about any of the systems and to see how any of the systems can be of use for you. Again, we would not give you production service. We will not enable you to run production services in the systems, but we will enable you to experiment with the systems and try to understand what impact the systems will have on your applications.
So, any questions for Rob, Jay, or Vlad, or Kenton along those lines?
I had a general question. If you're using virtual machines, if you're using virtual machines in different steps of the process, do you need to pass the data into the virtual machine, process it, and bring it back out with each different one?
Like for those software servers, every time it's doing a hop between different applications, it's also potentially passing the data around. Yeah, so that's a consideration.
There's no way around that?
You can try to do smart things, try to pick software servers that are closer. It has to be a consideration of the software. Yeah.
Okay, the other option, of course, is if you look at Amazon, it has an S3 file system, so we can mount that across the different systems. Jay was talking about the Exceed file. Exceed has an Exceed file system, which is across all Exceed systems file system, so you can just access it directly across all the systems. So there's things like that where people are working towards that. The Globus people are responsible, that can help us with transferring data through the internet too on high-speed networks across the different Exceed resources if necessary. So yes, there is an issue, but there's also ways for making sure that we have the data close to the compute node. Like Kenton was saying, if we have multiple steps that we need to perform on the software server, if we can make sure that they are sitting within the same Exceed resources, or in the case of Amazon, on the same Amazon sites, we can minimize the amount of transfer that needs to be done across long hops, and so leverage of the fact that we can have the data close to the compute nodes.